Good morning, everyone. Um, Thank you for being here today, taking the time away from your family and friends to be here. Um, I am the project manager for the development of form-based code in the pilot area. My name is Tarani Devi Palma. We also have different staff members and consultant team here to present the final version of this workshop that we have been having for the past 3 days. I know I've seen several of you participate in those workshops as well. So we do really appreciate that input. Today marks the third and final day, and we've also been doing multiple other stakeholder meetings in the past month. We've been hearing from UTA, we've been hearing from Downtown Arlington Management Corporation, neighborhoods, TxDOT, developers, business owners, property owners. So this has been a good number of people giving us their input and telling us what they want to see in downtown. So we do really appreciate that. Our consultant team has developed some vision for some of the core areas in the pilot area. And this, just to remind, this is just a concept plan. This is not what we're telling, this is what's going to happen, but this will help them write the code for that is intended to replace the current zoning code. So with that, I will move on to the slide. I also want to mention that there are two different long-range planning projects this going on simultaneously, and we want to mention the difference between them. One is the comprehensive plan that has kicked off, and we do have a name for it now. It is Innovate Arlington. This is a blueprint for the city. It'll be a 20-year blueprint. This Innovate Arlington will not be a zoning change. Just want to clarify that. That will include policies and recommendations about future zoning, and that to address growth and redevelopment pattern for the future of the city. The form-based code project, will be a possible zone change in the pilot area. It'll not affect any properties outside that boundary. There will be a community-defined zoning change to enhance downtown Arlington. That is the agenda for today. Going back to the timeline, I did mention that this started in October when the contract was awarded to Livable Plans and Codes for leading us in this effort. Since then, the council, the consultant team had made us a recommendation of the pilot area to the council, and the council gave us a green light to study that area. We are in that process right now, and then the stakeholder engagement happened in the late of January and also all throughout February, and then the March with the 3-day shred that's concluding that event. With that, the consultant will take the results from today, and we'll be doing the framework for the form-based code, and then after that they will be doing a draft code, and there will be plenty of opportunities between now and to the adoption when we are thinking of late September and October. There will be an open house when the draft code is ready for you all to come back and look at the code and let us know if it makes sense or if we need to do any more tweaks. We also have online engagement, arlingtonlistens.com. We've been receiving survey responses and comments from your neighbors regarding the process as well. So we want to hear from you throughout this process, and please help us continue to do that. There will be a city-initiated rezoning at the end of the adoption process, and if you have any questions regarding that, I or the city staff will be happy to answer those questions for you. I also want to highlight some of the previous effort that led us to here today. We had the downtown master plan that was adopted in 2018, and that highlighted some of the walkability. Those are some of the highlights that's mentioned here, and walkability was one of the key factors that were brought up then and now as well. So many of the stakeholders that we talked to, they highlighted this part. This form-based code will be a tool to achieve that walkability. So this is going to be like the implementation phase of what we want to see. Also creating high activity areas and farmers market, which is actually going to be happening starting this March end. I believe it's 29th. We all want to see you there as well. And we had some comments on wanting more boutique hotel and lodging and more festivals and events. So we are gearing up to make that happen. And some of the other planning efforts was Safe Streets Arlington and Discover Arlington that was adopted in 2012. And also there was a study that was done by UTA for walkability assessment for the section of downtown. So we have been taking input from all of these studies to actually write that code. And some of the feedback that or some of the goals from those planning efforts to improve connectivity between UTA and downtown, improve all sidewalks and fill gaps. We've been hearing that too, especially for ADA, improve pedestrian lighting and improve public landscaping, placing overhead utilities underground. Once the consultants start the presentation, you will see how this is linked to what they are coming up with. With that, I will hand it over to Jay Narayana. She is the project manager from Livable Plants and Codes.
Thank you, Tarni. Thank you all for meeting us this Saturday morning. I do want to introduce the team that's been working on this project. I am Jay Narayana, the principal of Livable Plants and Codes. And then I have Mike Houston with me, who's also going to kind of present some of the ideas that he developed. Brad Longberger with Place Strategies, Ivan Gonzalez with Place Strategies. I have Reed Cleater here with Kimley Horn, and then we have Randy Hutchison with Site Partners. So without this team, this would not have been possible. This is really an effort that we brought everything together in the last 2.5 days, but the effort was started a while ago when we did do a visit into the community in the city back in February, but we are back now in March. We started the charrette with a walking tour. We kind of looked at different locations in and around downtown. Once we actually nailed this project area, we wanted to kind of take another look at some of the opportunities. You look at some of the neighborhoods that are north of downtown. This is just to show you that all of downtown Arlington is not the same. The different characteristics in different areas in downtown. So this is Abrams Street. You have Abrams Street West there near Cooper, and then you have Abrams Street that's a little bit east. So there's very contrasting character of the street, even though it's the same corridor. Then you have East Main, east of the municipal center. You can kind of see that there is a different character here. The UTA campus to the south, you can see a lot of the new residential that's being developed. You have a variety of different sidewalk characteristics as well. You have some housing, some successful, some not so successful from a design standpoint. And then some more housing to the south. And as Tarni mentioned, we have talked to a lot of stakeholders in the last couple of months, and I won't really name each and every one of them, but I think it's over about 100 people that we've spoken to either individually or in groups. And some of the summaries from that stakeholder input is, I think everyone overwhelmingly supported this idea of walkable mixed-use development. They think downtown is heading in the right direction. They want to see more of it. But they do recognize that there are challenges to implementing it. Parking, connectivity has been brought up as a big issue, especially connectivity across a rail line, across Division, across Collins. Some of these major corridors are barriers from a connectivity standpoint. And they want to make sure that the form-based code that we develop is flexible and market-based, but also addresses some of the concerns in terms of compatibility with neighborhoods and adjacency to neighborhoods. It's like we're trying to, be on this very delicate balance between, being too restrictive versus too flexible. We have to find where where the middle ground is for this. And we also know that zoning is not going to solve everything. There's going to have to be other policies and programs that the city implements to dovetail with the form-based code, because the code itself is not going to redo the streets and infrastructure and provide the incentive policy for new developments that are desired in downtown. So we recognize that. So you all remember, most of you I think did attend the public open house on Thursday. I think we had almost 50 people in there, and we really had a very robust discussion. And I think people did participate with putting their dots on the boards. You can kind of see the results of that in the back here. Um, and some of the comments we did here, transportation again, the connectivity across the railroad and Cooper and Collins, more bike lanes needed. I think they said walkability was at least decent, but bike connections were really not there. And even for micromobility, you see the scooters around. That's kind of not very safe in some of the locations to ride those. And then maybe looking at future connectivity to the regional destinations, whether it's high-speed rail or other type of rail that could be considered. Maybe parallel parking and making parking more consistent, at least the on-street parking, because you have back-end angle, you have regular angle, you have parallel parking, head-end parking. So I think that was a little bit confusing, and the challenge though is that the right of way is different and redevelopment is different in different blocks. So I think this shows that the city has been flexible, but I think it's trying to make it more consistent in the future. And walkability and shade for walkability is really being important. In terms of land use, we had a lot of comments. Again, this is just a distillation of some of the comments. You can all read for yourself some of the more specific concepts and ideas. I think architectural compatibility and variety was mentioned. Some people didn't much care for the modern architecture. Some people wanted more of the modern architecture. Again, we are trying to find that happy balance. Maybe it's really saying that we don't want everything to be the same. We want some variety. Grocery options, maybe increasing that, improving that. Again, this is not something that the zoning can directly bring about, but it's something that definitely we can relate to the city, that an incentive policy may be placed to kind of attract a grocery store and find a location for it and make sure it works within the context of the form-based code we are writing. And making sure that staff has adequate support to make sure that once the code is adopted, it can be administered well and you actually get good results from it. We recognize that the code also has to protect some of the historic assets that the community has, which is far and few between. So we recognize that. Maybe there's opportunities for infill, but really kind of selecting those locations carefully, so that way you're protecting the neighborhoods as well. And some more, I think we talked about the grocery, allowing live work. I think this is kind of strange because in every code that we have written, everyone says they want live work, but to actually implement live work is really tough. So we recognize that maybe allowing that, maybe the market will change in the future. Simplifying the administration of certificates of occupancy when uses change. We know that building code is a separate issue that the zoning code is not directly addressing, but again, this is one of those things that we're going to let the city know that, hey, we have this great zoning tool, but if you don't address these other issues related to other ordinances in the city, you may not get the most out of your form-based code. I think that's where we know what issues relate to the form-based code and what issues do not. Again, really wanting more parks and green spaces in downtown. I think you do have some new ones, Dream Park and the dog park, but really then activating those parks by having more redevelopment around those parks and connecting those parks to other open spaces and creeks, etc., is really something we should focus on. And another comment we got is really trying to find this iconic location for some iconic building, a tower or something of that nature that can really be a kind of calling card to downtown Arlington. So I won't review this very in much detail, but you can kind of see it's a little bit hard to read on this slide, but the idea is that people pick different images for different locations, and we just kind of highlighted the most often selected ones. This is for West Division and West Abram. People really wanted some mid-rise and adaptive reuse and possibly some mid-rise multifamily, etc. So that's really what was kind of desired in this area. And then this is for the Old Town Hill central neighborhoods. You can kind of see people wanted the corner store, small office, single family detached, accessory unit, cottage court. Those are kind of the uses and building types people desire to see. And this is in the entertainment district and East Division. They were willing to see a little more density, a little more intensity of development. And this is for downtown core and downtown north. It's similar, maybe adaptive reuse in the short term, but maybe high rise mixed use in the long term. So we took all this input and we've been working for the last 2 days and developing some ideas and concepts. And we kind of identified, again, there's a lot of opportunity in downtown. There's a lot of redevelopment already happening. So the idea was to try to find out locations, blocks for redevelopment where there's already momentum going on. We know there's development interest, developer interest. So trying to identify where those locations may be, and also to show different contexts within downtown. So there are some neighborhood blocks we chose. There are some blocks along Division Street that we've chosen, and then there's some blocks in the core of downtown as well that we've chosen to look at concepts. So with that, we're going to kind of zoom into areas 1 and 2, which is Division and Collins Street. So the area 1 is the northwest corner of Collins and Division. This area has the gas well behind it, Truman gas well, I think. And then you also have mobile home park behind that. That's area number 2. And I think Brad developed some concepts that he'll talk about. Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, Jay. One of the big elements here was how do we get pedestrians to walk through these larger block structures? So one is kind of reconnecting the street grid and starting to look at how we could, I don't even think you can see that, how you can start to actually have pedestrian access through the block structure so that we're not forcing pedestrians to Division Street or Collins to get between the entertainment district and downtown, but actually utilizing interior pedestrian passages to kind of cross and move through the whole area. What we did do was look at development types such as hotels to couple with another hotel that's actually developed on the southeast corner of Division and Collins. So additional hotels to create more of a cluster of entertainment destination and gateway into downtown. How to incorporate different types of mid-rise residential in the area, and then coupling those with restaurant that's along that pedestrian walkability area in the future. Now, there is a gas well there today, so a lot of that can't happen for some time. But the question is, what happens if that gas well does get decommissioned and capped? It could become a smaller public space and have that development kind of wrap around it, while also tying in the excess land around the water park as additional open space. So you're starting to create this pedestrian environment in the area. Okay. So some of the kind of building examples from different places across the country, the high-rise residential or hotel could be just at the far corners, whereas the housing and stuff could be more akin to this environment, which is in South Bend, retail ground floor, residential above, or that pedestrian mall area. That's Pearl Street in Boulder. Just nice pedestrian walkway area as some examples. The water tower park itself, of course, you don't have a Tin Man like this one does in the picture, but centering green space around water towers has been pretty common in a lot of downtowns in Texas. We've got Oak Street in Roanoke, and you've got Round Rock just north of Austin. And then the mobile home park itself, looking at how that could become more of a pocket park neighborhood system where you're preserving those trees and having the housing kind of within the environment and consolidating parking into common parking spaces. But we do have another concept for that, where if it were to take it to a little bit higher density element on the south side of that development of the mobile home park, looking at how maybe some 3-story townhomes could come off of North Street to feed into a street grid within that, so reconnecting that street grid internally, and then also transition that density as it moves closer to the neighborhood, so that it's stepping down density as it moves into the thicker neighborhood residential fabric there. There's some examples of those townhomes and pocket courts. Well, we also did, sure.
When you say mobile home park, is that going to be like just or will people be able to?
Currently, it's a mobile home park, and so we are showing alternatives to that if it were ever redeveloped in the future. Yeah. But I do like the idea of having, especially being in the entertainment district, if you're just doing cottage courts and things like that, there probably are some ways to fit in RV on the street network internally. But we did kind of talk about that a little bit. It was kind of a cool idea that someone did bring up. Okay. We also ran some tests on some sites that were not fully developed close to some of these historic neighborhoods in town. And so Yvonne on my team, on our team, was able to kind of test some ideas about height and setbacks as you look at that form of mass and compatibility with neighborhood. And this was, for instance, on Center and North was sort of that, or Center and Division? North, okay, Center and North. So how does that kind of density transition down as it gets closer to the neighborhood, but builds up as it gets closer to where more of the commercial activity could or would be in the area? And so really asking the questions and testing that, because nothing's set in stone yet. We're still going through some of those design standards and zoning standards, but how these little pockets of neighborhoods, whether accessory dwellings would be appropriate. So a lot of that was used to just test scenarios and ideas so we could have real conversations with the neighborhood itself to figure out what would be appropriate. Utilizing the alleys and also making sure those mature trees are taken care of. What are some of the policies the city could update to allow sidewalks to go around the trees versus tearing all the trees out to build sidewalks if that's desired? And I will hand off to Mike.
Thank you, Brad. So I was looking at two different areas, starting on the south side of the railroad track. So we're going to look at the East Main area first. And you can see before I get to the concept drawing that on the left side there, kind of wrapping around the municipal tower building, is a very large parcel with a large parking lot. And we expect that probably will be redeveloped one of these days. So we wanted to look at kind of how that would happen or how that could happen. And these are all illustrative ideas. This doesn't mean this is what is going to happen. It's just testing some scenarios. So this is the East Main, and if you can try to draw over here. So the large parcel is kind of in this area. That's the large parking lot. And what we were trying to do at that end is kind of break up what we would call a super block and add additional connectivity, both for vehicles and for pedestrians, because right now you kind of have to walk around it. But we want to be able to kind of penetrate that block and make connections from East Main over to Mesquite, and then also extend up from the south and going north-south as well. And that leaves you with 3 good-sized blocks that could all accommodate a parking garage if it was needed, or some housing, additional housing, courtyards, things like that.
Parking garages, it seems like fortune to park anywhere. So is it going to be paid parking, or is this
Yeah.
going to be like truly you can just come down here and chill if you don't have money for, to
Right.
go wherever.
That would be a detail that would be worked out later. That wouldn't be part of the zoning code that we're working on. We show that it's possible to put a garage there, but the developer and the city would work on some agreement for parking.
Who is the developer?
Well, I don't think there is a developer ready to do anything yet. We're kind of trying to get ahead of the development.
Okay, my concern here is when they did the gas wells, I had no idea that it was going to be a French company that came in and did it. By the language that y'all are using, it looks to me like you're already working with a French company or trying to go that way. So I'm wondering, with the developers, will they be US-based? Will they be Texas-based? Or are we going to bring in people? I have no clue why we bring in people from
Yeah. I don't
states
think-
far away for
Yeah,
our
I have
city
no idea
stuff.
who the developer will be. I don't think the city knows, that's not something that we get involved in, so. But,
Those are important questions that I think everybody would like to know before you
yeah.
say anything.
Well, yeah, as far as I know, there is no developer getting ready to do anything here, so I have no idea. We're just looking at when the development comes along, how's the best way to do it? And how do we code it? How do we integrate those ideas into the zoning code to make sure those pedestrian and vehicular connections happen so the scale of the building fits with the downtown, those kind of things. So moving on to the east, we also noticed at the end of East Main Street, there's a nice cluster of trees in front of some existing structures, and we kind of use that as a placemaking element. We thought you could kind of curve the road around the old trees and kind of make a nice green space there, and also acts as a traffic calming moment, so it kind of slows cars down as they're coming down East Main. Oh, two questions.
So I see that you have Main Street continuing. It currently dead ends at Mesquite and then ends at the Superblock and then resumes afterwards. Is there a plan to extend that all the way through and create a connection there?
Yes, over to Mesquite? Over to Mesquite, you're
Yes,
talking
like
about?
carrying Main Street all the way east instead of having
Yeah,
that
yeah,
break
we're,
up.
we're recommending that it be connected, yes.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah.
For the northwest corner of Abram and East, I suggested a 350-foot tall Sky Spire tower as another option, as it would draw in tourist traffic from the restaurants that are already
Right.
on Abram, and this tower would have gondolas rotate, kind of in a spiral going to an observation deck and revolving restaurant on top. MV Rides is offering a tower like this, but nothing's been built, so I think this is the opportunity to build it.
Yeah,
I
sure.
proposed several other sites too
Mm-hmm.
for it.
Yeah, I think there are probably multiple sites downtown where you could do something like that. And we didn't put a dot where that tower might go, but there's space there. So if you can bring the, whoever would operate that in, and, you could consider that as a site. So anyway, we're also responding to the downtown master plan proposed a connection across the railroad tracks that would connect to Front Street. And I know the city is looking at ways that could be implemented. There's also potential maybe for another connection down here further to the east. And then along East Main, the rest of East Main, what we like about it is it's really kind of parallel street to Abram, so Abram is taking most of the traffic. So this could be a quieter, slow street, good for residential or maybe some restaurants and things like that. And it could also develop incrementally at the beginning, and then maybe further along, someone will buy a few parcels, put them together, and do some, larger scale housing along that street. So we think it's a great opportunity to create another neighborhood, another downtown neighborhood that's very active. And then we'll go to the next. I think I covered all that. Here's some examples of the kind of buildings and kind of the scale that could be associated with that development. Oh, yeah. And then we're going to move to the West Front Street, kind of the western side of downtown. And we know along Front Street, there are some existing historic buildings, the Heritage Park there. And we obviously want to work with those existing historic resources. There's also 2 houses, which I know that they've been talking to the city about retaining those houses and potentially repositioning them on the site. So we took a little latitude with kind of moving some things around there, but keeping that as a kind of a placemaking moment. I'll go to the plan here. So here's the plan that we came up with. Again, these are just concepts and ideas to inform our coding, but you can see down there on Front Street. So that shows the purple buildings are the historic buildings, which we've kind of, some of them have stayed in place, a couple have been shifted just a little bit, and we think they can kind of be connected maybe with some newer buildings that are very sensitive to the old buildings, low scale, 1-story buildings. And that you could have some restaurants and maybe some event space in there. You've got some beautiful big old trees in that area, which I think would really make that feel like a special place. So it'd really become kind of a destination if you kind of assembled all those things together and thought about how they interact. We know that you've also been, there's been discussions about the farmer's market. And one idea was to do a shade structure, because we know it gets hot here in the summer, that might mimic the roof line of the old train station. I think we have, yeah, so we found an image of the old train station up there on the board, and then we found another precedent, similar farmer's market that's been built in another city that uses just that steel open structure so that you could park underneath it during the week, and then on the weekends you can clear out all the cars and you can have your farmer's market. So we thought that was a really good idea. That's something that came from the community. We just put it on paper and showed how it could work. And then around that area, we're showing some new buildings. There's been discussion about maybe there's a parking garage located there that would serve as the parking for some additional housing that would be kind of interwoven into the existing fabric. We don't get to decide exactly where all the parking garages go, but when there is a parking garage that is going to be implemented, we establish guidelines on how they're going to be designed, how they're going to interact with the street. We want, in the best case scenario, we want active uses along the parking garage, so residential can wrap around the parking garage, so you're not looking at the side of the garage. Mm-hmm.
I also suggested for where the farmers market service, Amtrak and commuter, a rail station, and it would be restaurants in it. There'd be a hotel and also a clock tower with an observation deck on the top floor.
Yeah, and that could be another alternative if the passenger rail comes back. I don't think there are any plans right now for that to happen, but if it does, I think that's a good example to use, so. Yeah. That's a good idea. Let's see, what else? Again, I think this development could happen incrementally. It doesn't mean that you're going to take anything out that doesn't want to move. You just kind of work around and let it evolve over time. And that might be the last slide. Let's see. Yeah, and I think I'm going to hand it back over to Jay to talk about streets.
Thank you, Mike. Again, the code addresses a lot of the private development, but without redesign of the streets and ensuring walkability along these streets, it's really going to be tough to implement some of the goals of the form-based code. So some of the things that we did here and we are recommending in the future code as we write it, some of it may be in the zoning code and some of it may be recommendations for the city to adopt into their streets policy, is consistent street trees and plantings, street furniture, pedestrian scale lighting, crosswalks, and making sure that the front yards and building entrances are along these sidewalks and public spaces, and outdoor seating. I mean, so you can kind of look at all the issues and elements the street really has to address. And so this is an example of your current sidewalks. It's not consistent because along the same corridor you have different pavement materials, different widths, different street tree configurations. For example, on one side of the street, there are no street trees and there's a grade issue. So we want to kind of make sure that in the future, at least, we have some consistency in how these are implemented. So this is Collins Street. I think we heard a lot about Collins being not really walkable, and you can kind of see there is that rutted path there that people are walking along, especially on game days. There's no shade. It's really hostile to pedestrians. And here, I don't think there's any sidewalk. You have to really, on the right, on the image on the right here. So here's an example of what type of protected sidewalk along a large arterial. So of course this is an example from Paris. It doesn't necessarily mean this may make exact sense here, but the example kind of shows how you can improve the pedestrian environment.
All over Arlington, you cannot make turns because trees, they don't keep them trimmed. So you have to pull way out into the street before you can see if anyone's coming. And I like the shade idea and all, but with these trees, I see the same problem happening because it's happening already. And I guess I'm really frustrated because our city is so bad everywhere else, yet we're taking time on this, which I know y'all are just a committee. But anyway, the trees, make sure that they're not going to grow big enough to block your view, because it is a huge problem
Right.
in Arlington.
There are operational issues and maintenance issues that obviously the
But
city
in
will have
the
to
in the
address.
planning, why not go ahead and plan to make sure that that the trees are going to be such that they're not
Yes.
gonna grow to do that.
Yes, absolutely. I think we're going to take that into consideration as we create the street palette, the tree palette for the trees that are planted along the street. So the idea for Collins would be to have a very wide sidewalk with the safety barrier between the street and the pedestrian. Again, this is very conceptual, preliminary. We understand that there isn't enough right of way, but as redevelopment happens, this could actually happen on the private realm side. There's a question here, Tarni.
Like truly excellent mixed-use paths north of Roger going up to the stadium. So if those could be continued further along Collins, it'd be a truly wonderful pedestrian experience there.
Yeah. So these are some ideas where you can really kind of have a very wide sidewalk that's protected, because Collins is still going to be a major corridor that's going to carry 40, 50,000 cars. We understand that, but you really don't feel like sitting on a sidewalk cafe right on Collins. But if you have a 10-foot wide street tree planter with another 20 feet of sidewalk, that kind of makes it pleasant to sit along a sidewalk cafe there. Some other street options, you do have 50-foot wide rights-of-way and 60-foot wide rights-of-way. We're trying to kind of create a consistent palette of how these streets would be improved as you go further. So you can kind of look at the sidewalk being consistent with that. And I know the drive lanes seem wide, but I think you are allowed on-street parking as it's a standard neighborhood street. This is another one with 60 feet. Again, this is one option. We can look at other options, maybe with on-street parking on one side. This may be in a location where it serves more as a collector and you need a turn lane, for example. So this is an example of what that could look like. I think it's called a rumble strip. Another idea we thought about was a concept of shared street. A shared street is really a street that's also good for pedestrians, that there's no demarcation between the sidewalk and the main vehicular lanes. It's really an open street. I think Keller has implemented one of these. Actually, this idea can be implemented on West Front Street, where Mike was talking about the farmers market. This could be an extension of that farmers market plaza, for example. It could be on South Street that really connects UTA as a parallel connector from the university to downtown, and also on East Main, where all that redevelopment could potentially happen, parallel to Abram Street. So this is an idea. If the current street may look something like this, and you kind of create a shared street, so there's no curb and gutter. There is still designated areas for parking if you want to, but you can close the street down for festivals and events, etc. I think we have an example of something like that in Keller, which we should put in this presentation eventually. So this would be a cross-section for what the shared street could look like. There's another example of that, Oleander Street, which is more like an alley, but it's really a softer residential kind of character along the street here. And this is Bates Street in Keller. That kind of looks more like what I think we want to have here. With that, any questions about the street cross sections?
Comment. Gosh, that was loud. I live in the historic neighborhood on the north, and you were talking about streets and safety and that kind of a thing for pedestrians. Because of our neighborhood tends to be very, people drive through it a lot. Was there any consideration for maybe closing off some of the streets, say maybe Elm, and allowing less thoroughfares through the neighborhood to allow it to be a little bit more neighborhoody?
Yeah,
So
I think
two
yeah.
streets that the neighbors have actually talked about that would be nice to be disconnected from Division is Elm Street and then Pecan Street, because we still have NL Robinson, which is a very large street. We still have Center, Mesquite, and East that would still be thoroughfares through the neighborhood, but it would stop the racing and you know what I'm saying?
The challenge though is we generally don't recommend closing streets. The challenge is then it forces all the traffic onto Center and Mesquite, which are already pretty high, speed thoroughfares because they're one way. So we may have inadvertent consequences because of that. So that's a study that has to happen separately from this initiative. Obviously, that input is going to be provided to the city, and looking at the overall network and making sure the traffic is distributed, so you don't kind of burden other property owners and at the expense of some, and protect some property owners at the expense of others. So I think it's just a balancing issue too.
In the proposed streetscapes, I noticed a conspicuous lack of bike lanes. Was that something you guys studied and decided against, or was that something you guys didn't consider?
I think the bike lane discussion has to happen at a citywide level where they look at the overall network, and there are some streets that may have, if they're protected, versus on street. Some of these neighborhood streets are low speed, so we see that as being bicycles riding with the regular traffic. But I think that's not a level of analysis that we got into at this stage in our planning. Yeah. The code doesn't have, is not.
Yeah, I was just going to add that the form-based code, because it's implemented incrementally usually, the bike lanes are something that needs to be implemented on more of a citywide scale, and it's more of a transportation element. And the code that we're writing deals more with like the private property side and the sidewalk, but not as much with the actual street. We can put ideas out there, and we notice those things, your observations as well, just when we're walking around and scootering around, but the code may not be the right implementation tool for that. But we agree with you.
Well, there may be some corridors where eventually they kind of connect all the way through and connect.
What's the street that you're talking about where you make it look like Bates Street in Keller?
I think there are options to convert like South Street, West Front Street, even East Main. All those corridors could. We're not saying all of them will, but the opportunity to convert any of them is there.
I was just going to mention that we talked about the comprehensive plan taking place also, and so that might be a opportunity. I know later this month, there's going to be some sessions, open sessions on the comprehensive plan. So speaking to the bike lanes and making sure the emphasis is brought up there, I think could be helpful as well. So just as a thought. Okay, good. All right, I'll see you there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if we have, I can look them up. I don't know if you've got them handy, but.
The city will announce that at the end. Yeah.
But yeah, there are a couple of sessions later this month. The other thing I was just going to mention back when we were talking about the neighborhood plan, particularly again around the North Central Historic area, is I think my sense is the key is going to be how we create that transition from downtown feel, Division Street, into the neighborhoods. And so.
We're getting to that.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So you haven't really gotten to that yet? Okay. Because I think, height-wise in particular, I know there were some discussions about everything from the hotel that at least the graphic or the picture that was shown there seemed a little much for where we are and what it looks like today. And then, I was just thinking like maybe North Street is a boundary.
Yes.
So that you limit in the form-based code the height with anything north of North Street so that you at least allow Division Street to be kind of that corridor, but not too much or nothing any further. So those are just a couple
You
thoughts.
took the words right out of my mouth.
Okay,
So,
great.
Before we started this process and we asked you some questions, we looked at the downtown neighborhoods as such, as in terms of the character of different areas of downtown, and we kind of try to identify blocks that are similar, and we looked at downtown as, you have the core, you have the north of downtown area, which is along Division Street, and then you have the neighborhood to the north of that, and then you have East Abram Border Street, where there's another neighborhood there, and then the entertainment district connector, and then the West Division, West Abram, which is more akin to the university there. So this is just our preliminary, our first blush of, kind of trying to identify the sub-districts that would be comprised in the form-based code. So, for example, we looked at areas that we would possibly remove from the current boundary. That's the area that's just north of Sanford. I think the only reason we included the Housing Authority parcel is because it's in the neighborhood overlay. So if you want to clean up the neighborhood overlay, it just kind of makes sense to keep it in there. We removed some of those parcels that were fronting on Sanford. Because a lot of the property to the south is actually not fronting Sanford, it's fronting the north-south streets. Then we removed the portion here that's west along Division. It's north of the railroad and along Division. One of the reasons we kind of removed that is because a lot of the redevelopment momentum is actually on the east side, and by the time it comes over here, it may be another 10, 15 years, and we may end up kind of recommending that be added later on down the road so the city doesn't bite off more than it can chew. And then we did hear a lot from some of the stakeholders that this neighborhood is in flux, it's in transition, that lots being bought up and redevelopment happening, so maybe making sure that the redevelopment that happens is consistent would be a good way to kind of address this neighborhood. Again, this is preliminary. Anything that goes forward, we will flesh it out with you all, and then council will have to approve the boundaries. So this is just our first attempt at doing that.
Jay, just a quick question before we leave this. So if I'm understanding correctly, the removed at the top there is on the north side of Sanford Street. Is that what
Yeah.
you're saying? Okay.
Yeah.
So
We'll go
anything?
into a detail now. So.
Okay, all right. I was just,
So this area that we're calling the traditional neighborhood, which is yellow, which is most of the old town and the other historic blocks there, and then the blocks east of Collins and south of Abram, is what we're calling the traditional neighborhood. Okay, so what we would recommend is 1 to 2.5 stories. This would what the standards in the form-based code would reflect is a range of residential building types, single family, cottage court, maybe some townhomes along the edge, like if you're on at closer to the south. So this is the kind of development standards that would be in the code for those blocks. So the next would be the transition, right? So you go from the neighborhood, yeah, go. Here's a question.
I saw a single family and townhomes mentioned. Would that also include duplexes or triplexes that are like horizontal rather than vertical?
Yes, but we haven't decided the form, and the bulk has to be really kind of carefully considered. So that's something we'll make sure that as we write the details of the code, we kind of keep that in mind as to the neighborhood sensitivity to that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to add, the neighborhood did create some district standards previously. They haven't been adopted, but we did take a look at those. And so a lot of those are aligned with some of the cottage kind of development, front porches, restrictions on height, a lot of the things that the neighborhood had already been working on align very well with the type of traditional housing that would be regulated in the form-based code. So I just wanted to add that is very helpful, and it was a valid kind of a validation of some of the things that we are looking at that traditional neighborhood style.
So the next would be the transition area between the traditional neighborhood and the core of downtown, which we're calling the urban neighborhood. So you can kind of see some of those areas are along Front Street, and then the mobile home park, of course, and then the areas west of Cooper, because that's where a lot of the residential development related to UTA is happening, some of the 3-4 story apartment buildings, and then southeast of downtown as well. So that we're calling the urban neighborhood. So you can kind of see there's a range of urban residential housing and commercial. Not every block will be required to have commercial on the ground floor, but maybe at key locations, intersections, etc. That's something, again, as we calibrate the code, we'll develop those details. And we also kind of noted that there's need for some common open space, courtyards, etc. for the urban residential development that comes in. The next area we're talking about is corridor mixed use, which is a tough, it's kind of like no man's land, right? Cooper Street and East Abrams, these are the approach corridors into downtown, but right now they're not very hospitable. So how do you address them? And they're going to take a long while before they transition. So you have to allow a lot more flexibility in the development standards. And I think Mike wants to add something.
Is this on? Okay. To the topic of the areas that we removed, because if West Division was kept in, that would most likely be that character zone, correct? And I just wanted to point that out, that there's still some debate. We had some good input during the workshop that maybe it should be kept in. So we're going to get additional input from the city and council members on whether that area of West Division should remain or be removed. As Jay said, this is just preliminary and not etched in stone yet.
So the idea would be for the corridor mixed use, you'd have a lot more flexibility in the development types and frontage. We may allow some parking along the sides of buildings and not always required in the back, for example, in your typical form-based code. So it's really trying to allow people to use their existing sites and buildings to the extent possible. The other is the entertainment mixed use. This is the connection between the downtown and the entertainment district, which is along Collins mostly. Again, a lot of existing auto service. There is the gas well, of course, in that location. So the potential for this is a long ways out in terms of when the redevelopment could happen. But you could look at possibly 24-story buildings. Right now, there is no height limit in the entertainment center overlay. So just kind of making sure that there is consistency in the development options. Maybe a range of building types: offices, hotels, residential towers, sports entertainment destinations. You could have a range of development opportunities there. Then we go to the
So I can understand maybe on the east side of Collins allowing for a 24-story building, but on the west side, because we're into that transition zone between neighborhoods. And so would that be maybe a step-down option
Well,
place?
yeah, we could actually create the requirement for those height transitions even in the district, right? I mean, we could kind of say that you don't want a 24-story and a 4-story, so maybe there's a requirement for a step down. But those are all the details and the nuances that as we go through writing the code, we will develop.
Also, think that maybe there could be a 50 to 70 floor mixed use office, hotel, or residential skyscraper with an observation deck open to the public on top, like the Shard in London.
Yep. So next we go to the downtown core, which is mostly in your downtown business district. I think there are some adjustments to that boundary. And so you look at 12 stories, we're looking at 12 stories maximum range of mid-rise buildings, restaurant, even it would include one-story buildings. Obviously, we wouldn't require a minimum height. Restaurants, offices, hotels, residential, civic, entertainment. This would allow the most mix of all uses. So you can kind of see the images that give you the intent of what the standards would implement, hopefully. So with that, this is, again, going back to the preliminary regulating plan. If you all have any specific questions or you want to look at specific areas, we can zoom in, zoom out. Again, this is high-level preliminary. We will have to dig down into each boundary here and each parcel and make sure it's appropriate and right as we go through the process. That's where we start cleaning it up. So hopefully everyone understands that this is just our first attempt. And the other dashed lines there are locations where we may want to see additional connectivity in terms of reconnecting the street grid based on some of the concept plans that were developed. We identified some locations where you have these super blocks that we want to break down the blocks and where additional streets would be required as redevelopment happens.
One thing to add quickly, so the point that was made on Cooper Street, on Cooper Street, goes for a lot of the other districts as well. And so, the one particular in my mind, again, from the historic neighborhood side is, that transition area, especially on North Street that was mentioned before, but also having specific standards that even though it is one district, there are different standards depending on what you're next to within that same district. And so if you are, on Cooper, it was the example of the neighborhood that's on the other side. If you're next to a neighborhood, maybe that, here,
And even the entertainment district, you like.
entertainment district, but here as well, how you approach next to residential compared to how you approach, say, on the south side of North Street would be different because there would be transition standards, buffers, those types of kind of details within the same district, even though it is in the same district. So I wanted to make that clear. And again, the code isn't written yet. We're looking at the framework, and this is the preliminary regulating plan. But those are some of the details also within an existing district as well.
Thanks, Ivan. With that, we just wanted to talk about next steps. You have anyone has a question? Oh, hey, Kelly.
Hey, and some of the neighbors outside of the downtown core, are there going to be opportunities for like pocket retail or like, small little shops, things for walkability? So if you want to get some milk or something like that, you could walk from your house down the street, go to the corner store, something like that.
Yeah,
or
I
go to a
think-
wine bar or whatever it
yeah.
may be.
I think we would add corner commercial and office kind of uses also to this mix. I think yes, I think we would recommend that. But the scale would be limited. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
given that the skyscraper at Six Flags is 400 feet tall, I think in the entertainment mixed-use area in downtown core, buildings should be able to go up to 40 or 50 floors.
Well, I think trying to establish a blanket height like that is not meaningful to get the achieve the vision. Those things have to be approved as one-offs by city council. That's a unique destination and tower, but entitling the whole district for like one location makes it difficult for the market to know what is really expected. Right. Yeah.
One other question or comment, and it's related to maybe the transportation plan or the stickers that were put up related to that. And so I'm trying to think through how it might apply to the form-based code, but if there are crossings considered traffic crossings now, I'm talking automobile crossings at either Cooper Street, or I've heard there's discussion about some sort of a flyover crossing that comes in somewhere around Abram Street. Are those going to be addressed at all in this? Because I guess what I could see coming out of that is if you create those corridors, then you're going to perhaps create or design for development that goes along those traffic corridors. So how does that fit together, or has there been any discussion about those traffic crossings of the railroad?
You mean the pedestrian crossings?
No, they actually automobile.
Oh, okay.
So in other words, if you create some sort of a crossing at Cooper Street that goes up and over, or who knows, however it
okay.
gets created, what does that do, or how does the form-based code fit that particular design once it puts in place? Or I'm even more concerned about the eastern part where there's been some discussion about some sort of a crossing that does some sort of a flyover or something that comes into Abram Street. But the question is, what gets developed along those crossings?
I think that there is nothing on the books right now, and obviously those things can change what ends up happening on the development side. But right now we're going under the presumption that it's an at-grade intersection, and if there are other plans that will have to be revisited at some point. So code can be amended, right? This is not set in stone.
So, those are difficult to put in. So is there something, I guess there's something y'all want to think about with the code now? Because we have the underpasses at West Street now.
Yes.
That if there's another underpass or something like that further east, because the train is problematic in general. Is there something we can do in the code now to not preclude, like with setbacks or something like that, for if that underpass comes at one of these segments, that we could do that? Because that grades are very, they're going to be challenging to do. We have to shut down 2 others or 3 others or whatever's in our pockets. But I guess, is there an area that you guys think would be preferred for an eastern grade separation, whether it's under or over?
I think that's something we should talk to the city about, and the city transportation department, and kind of figure out if there's something that maybe the comprehensive plan is envisioning that we can kind of maybe make sure that nothing's in the code that would preclude that from happening in the future.
Okay.
Potential locations for an overpass or underpass are Collins Street to the east, or Cooper Street a little to the west of West Street, because Cooper Street's a very busy thoroughfare over a busy rail line. So that, I think, is a good candidate to do it, because you can't do it every crossing, but Cooper would be a good one.
I think there's another one the city is envisioning on the east side of Johnson Creek, if I'm not mistaken, the city.
Yeah, there used to be the one at Stadium or Ballpark where it crosses Division. That used to be an underpass, and it got rebuilt as a at grade. But yeah, there's not really any way to get across the road when the train comes through, except for West Street and then Fielder. So you know, and then also just for ped bike connectivity and everything like that, it's tough when the train comes. So it is kind of, you know, as the city's thinking about that, probably want to think about how does that tie into the code as redevelopment's coming. You know, how do we at least preserve the space for when that opportunity comes to at least add that through there? Because it's pretty bad when you go
Right.
east of West Street.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is another street which this map doesn't go all the way there, but I know that the city is looking at one just east of Johnson Creek there. It's going to be like a jug handle. I mean, the problem is you have to get above grade and get back to grade, and it's yeah, it's. No, it's not this one. It's like a little bit east of there, I think. I don't remember the name of the street. AT&T Way. Okay. With that, I think we just want to talk about the next steps. We will be developing the form-based code framework in this next month and a half. Hopefully, we'll be bringing it back to the community, P&Z and City Council for their review. And we would want them to bless it before we actually start writing the details of the code. So at least there's some agreement that yes, we'll have these sub-districts. Generally, we agree with the character of some of these sub-districts and the density, intensity, and the mix of uses and the boundaries in general. And then we actually start writing the details of the code. And then after the code is drafted, we'll have city staff kind of thoroughly review it, making sure it meets all their existing policies and programs and there's no inconsistencies. And then we'll be rolling it out to the stakeholders for their input and feedback, and then finally have an open house. Hopefully, we'll be sending notifications to all the property owners, and then bringing it back to City Council for their final adoption. So there'll be two actions at City Council. One, they have to actually adopt the zoning district because it'll be a new zoning district, and then I have to do a city-initiated rezoning for all the properties within the zoning district as well. So. Well, the city council has to have a formal vote on both. It's a public hearing.
So when you have the stakeholder reviews, will you email everybody? Give us a few weeks so that we can.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. We'll make sure there's adequate review time.
Just want to say this is wonderful work. It's super exciting to see this happening for our first form-based code, and this looks really awesome and forward-thinking, and hopefully this can be replicated in other parts of the city.
Yes.
But 100% hope that, you know, everything moves forward smoothly, but this is phenomenal work, and I love what I see.
Thank you.
Will the slides from today's presentation be available anywhere, or are they going to be posted?
Yes, I think on the Arlington's listens.com.
This is also being recorded. And I know that there's been talk of introducing form-based code for Division Street between downtown and the entertainment district, and same with Collins between downtown and the entertainment district. So how will that be implemented? Because that division between downtown and the entertainment district is not included in the current code.
It is included here. It's between Collins and Cooper. The whole of division is, some of it is in that purple and some of it is in the blue. You mean? Well, the cross-section is being developed by this, worked on by the city with TechStart on the actual sidewalks. But we are looking at the zoning regulations that would regulate private development. Yeah. With that, really thank you all for spending your Saturday morning with us, and we'd be happy to answer any questions. And some of these drawings are here on the boards. If you want to walk around and have questions, the team will be here to answer any questions. Thank you.